didn't see you there. Did you click on this video to learn how to paint an apple? Well, you've come to the right place. Today I'm going to be teaching you guys exactly how to paint the apple I painted in the thumbnail, and we are going to be touching on what not to do and what to do by covering some of the painting fundamentals. We'll touch on a couple of them briefly, and by the end of this, you will be a Da Vinci at painting apples. So let's jump right into it. If you're unfamiliar with Photoshop, please take a moment to go and watch my previous video, which tells you everything you need to know and all the tools that I'm using to complete this painting. Okay, so we're going to start off with this random picture of an apple I found off of Google for this demonstration. And if you were to start with no guidance, what I've seen a lot of beginner artists and students do, which is not wrong, is they start off by creating a sketch. And then they try and take the sketch through to a painting, and I've seen it go normally one of two ways. And it either ends up with line art and some flat colors, maybe a little bit of shading, or they try and go the painting route, where they throw in like paint splodges everywhere, and where their shading generally tends to look desaturated. And unfortunately, I know a lot of people struggle with their paintings looking lifeless. And this has a lot to do with the fundamentals of painting and their lack of understanding of them. And so with this painting of an apple, I'm going to demonstrate some of those for you today. And that is how you can take those two examples through to looking like a more stylistic and visually pleasing apple. It's not hyperrealism because that's not what I specialize in and that's not what I enjoy. So I'm going to be teaching you guys how to do a painting which looks like this. But if you guys are hyperrealists or cartoonists or super stylized artists, then I believe that this lesson will be very useful to you as well, because everyone, no matter what you draw, should know the fundamentals of art and painting. So let's start with the very first fundamental. Is we're going to be taking a look at this reference photo and breaking it down. We're going to start off with the light. So we need to establish where the light is coming from in this photo. And you can see here by looking at the highlights which I've sketched in, you can see where the light is coming from. So what I mean by highlights is where the light is hitting and where the apple is the brightest, which you can see is here and here. And that tells us that the light is coming from a top right sort of direction, almost like the sun. And so if we take that a bit further and we pretend that the apple is a cube, we can render out where the light's going to hit on this cube. You can see it's the same direction. So that the topmost face over here is going to be the brightest, and then the one facing us is going to be medium, and then the ones facing away from the camera is going to be the darkest. You can see the shadow over here on the apple. All of this is going to be in darkness, and it continues through to the shadow of the apple. And so, since we already know what the apple is going to look like as a cube, how do we describe its form further and in more detail? And what do I mean by form? I mean the 3D shape of an apple. So if we take a look back at the two examples, we can see here this one lacks form. It looks very flat. It looks like it is a 2D apple, almost like a cutout. And while this one looks a bit more round, it still could benefit from a better understanding. And so we're going to break it down on the photo itself and see if we can turn it into a more geometric shape, just to help us understand the planes of the object. So if I draw on top of this reference, I can see this is going to be the top facing plane, comes down here, and we can break it up into almost different planes. And we're almost creating a wireframe of the object. And now that I have a rough understanding, I can take that further and I can start using that information in my pencil sketch. So I know that it's kind of flat on top, as you can see here. So I've done a flat circular object which I'm going to cut into, almost like I'm sculpting. And I can go and clean up the sketch later. This is just helping my understanding of how the apple would look in reality. So what I often do is I often sketch out organic shapes first because I'm more comfortable with them, and I cut into them, as you can see like I'm doing over here. I also use the eraser tool a lot when I'm sketching, just to help take away lines that are confusing and that I don't need anymore. And also to push the sketch back. I'll just lightly brush over it all. And if we fast forward a bit, then you'll see what we have in the end. Okay, and what you can see here is it's not perfect, but that's not quite what we're trying to create here. We're just trying to help understand the forms of the apple. So what I've deemed important in this drawing and in this reference is this little dip in the apple over here. You can see it reflected in my drawing there as these lines curve inward. I really like this highlight plane, so I've made it a huge big shape here without cutting through it because I think that distracts from where I want to take my painting. I want this part to be quite flat in my final drawing, and I want most of the form to show through over here in this little dip. So you can see here I've broken this part down into smaller shapes, and then I've just filled in the rest of the form down here. Now this is a great sketch, but it could benefit more if we add some values, some different grays in, so that we can see where the light is coming from and where it's going to be in our final painting. If you guys would like a link to my brushes that I'm using, please check the description below. I've collected a bunch of brushes throughout the years, some of them I've made, and I believe they're all free to use. Okie dokie, so you can see here I've quickly thrown in some greys. It was a bit of a challenge for me to keep it simple because I immediately wanted to start rendering and blending the shapes in and making it look more like the reference photo and smoothing things out, but it's a very good exercise to see if you can keep the planes intact, because now we can see that this sketch is much more informative than this original one that we saw in the beginning. Can you see how much more information we've captured in this? And now we don't even need to use this for the final painting, but we can. That is up to you and your workflow. I'm going to keep it as a reference. I enjoyed this stage and I used it to just figure out and solve problems that I think I'm going to experience when painting the final apple. And the next thing that is important when painting is the color temperature and how the colors change from warm to cool in our reference photo, and how we can manipulate that to be more appealing in our own painting and interpretation. So what I suggest you do in the beginning to help your brain learn and see colors, you can color pick. So we're going to choose this mid-tone red here, this one that's in the middle. It's not a dark red, it's not a light red, it's just the red of an apple, known as its local color. And we're going to focus on the reds here because the same color temperature will apply across the entire image. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we are going to pick a red that's in shadow. So this is the same color red, same local color on the apple, but it's in shadow, so it looks darker, and we are going to pick a red that's in the highlight. And what we can see here from color picking is we can see how the color temperatures change. So if I go from the mid-tone one to the shadow, Can you see how our hue is shifting down? Now it's not an extreme shift, but we can exaggerate that in our painting. But since it's going down, it's going towards the cool sides. It's going towards the blues and the purples. So we know in shadow we can maybe push some more blues and purpley tones in there. I think that would look quite nice. And if we take a look from our mid-tone red to our highlights, you can see it's jumping upwards on the scale. It's going towards the yellows and greens, and so they get warmer until they hit the cold greens again. But we're going to say that our highlights are getting warmer and our shadows are getting colder. And if we were to demonstrate that in this little slider here, and we're going to exaggerate some of these things so that we know how to apply light and shadow in our painting and what's going to look nice. So we'll grab our mid-tone red, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it down on the hue, on the little value box, and down on the hue slider as well. I think I'm going to leave it at the red for now and just blend that in. And how I'm blending is I'm just color picking in between the two colors and lightly brushing over it. And then for the actual shadows, I think I'm going to take them right into the purples, because that'll look very nicely contrasted against the yellows in this apple, since they are complementary colors. And so if we grab our highlight color and brush that in, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change that because I think we can exaggerate it more. And I want more of an orange transition here. And then I think I want it to end more yellow. And even with the yellows, I'm going to push those more desaturated towards white. And I'm actually going to throw in, I think, a really, really, really light blue, almost white at the end, just to add a pop of contrast. And we can see the overall image is going to turn out quite cold, so we can really bump up the saturation in our mid-tone warms, just to create that pop. Okay, and so now that we know how we're going to color in our apple, all that's left to do is start. So the rest of the process of me painting this apple has been sped up, and I'll just go over what I'm thinking while I'm doing this. I'm creating a subtly textured background because I don't want it to detract from the main subject, the apple. And I'm throwing in some cool tones, some blues, maybe some purples, so that the apple will pop out even more with its bright reds and oranges. Once I have a background to work on, I create the rough shape and silhouette of the apple. I tried to sketch it out first and I realized I would much prefer to just big blob on the canvas and then carve away because I find that a lot easier. I've done this on a separate layer and later I merge it down onto the same layer. Now you can choose to work on as many layers as I want. I find it the easiest just working on 1, 2, maybe 3 layers. Otherwise I just get lost and confused. Throwing in the local colors as well as trying to push out where my highlight area is going to be. You see that top plane? I'm making it really bright and throwing in my lightest highlights up there so that I remember not to use those colors in the rest of the painting. Then I'm painting in those yellows and those greens and bright reds that you see there. What I'm paying attention to is just the rough overall shape that I see in the reference, and I'm trying to get them in generally the same areas. I'm taking a bit of creative license here and there. What's most important about this is that you have to stay zoomed out. Do not zoom in and start working on the tiny little details just yet. Even here when I'm painting, I work too small in some areas. You can see some of those pointy triangles are getting a little bit too small. What you need to do is you need to work as zoomed out as possibly as you can, and then once it starts looking like an apple, you can allow yourself to zoom in a little bit more and then start working on some of the finer details, and then you can zoom in even more, and eventually you'll know when to stop. Do not over-render your painting or it will look sterile and lose all of its life. So over here I'm throwing in the shadow as well. I'm leaving out the table because I feel like that brown is going to compete with my apple, and I just want it on a normal, like, solid background. And I'm also making the shadow purple because I think that's a lot more fun. And black, when you use black for shadows, it tends to again make the painting incredibly lifeless. So I advise you to find a shadow color. So I know that my shadows go towards the cooler tones, so I can pick a blue or a purple, and you don't have to go as saturated as I did here. I just quite enjoy throwing these bright saturated colors into my shadows. And now I'm zooming in and working on some of the tighter details here, trying to render out some of the highlight areas because that's where the eye is going to go first. I've decided that's where my focal point of the painting is going to be, in these purples and blue highlights, because I think they're interesting and fun. I'm using a combination of hard edge brushes and soft edge brushes to blur and sharpen areas of my focal point. You can see here what I'm trying to do is I'm also trying to push the main body of the apple further back into the background so it doesn't take up as much importance in the painting. I'm just going around and I'm blending in some shapes here and there, trying to capture that speckly texture of the apple without the painting becoming too convoluted. And a very important thing to be aware of is your edges, and I will probably release a video in the future explaining edges in more detail, but just with this apple is where I want it in focus, I make sure it has a hard edge, and where I want it to blend into the background, you can see I'm using a soft brush there. I create a soft edge so the background almost bleeds into the apple. This helps push and pull things in and out of focus. And you can see I'm constantly zooming out and seeing how the whole painting looks from afar. You can also squint and blur your eyes, and if it still reads as what you're trying to paint, then you're on the right track. It helps you focus on the overall big shapes of the painting and how it's reading, because it's so easy to get lost in the details. And I'm just cleaning up my edges, and here we have the finished painting. Okay, and this apple took me 20 minutes to do in real time. And we have a pretty nice stylized painting of an apple. And these theories can be applied to anything, any subject that you're approaching. It's very important to remember to break down your reference into lighting, form, color temperature. And then once you've done your studies of it, you can take it into your final painting where you need to be aware of your blending, your edges, your values going forward, and even just where you want your focal point to be. Well done guys, you made it to the end of the video, and hopefully you guys learned something and have a beautiful painting of an apple to show for it. If you're sharing it on social media, please tag me. I am on Instagram at artofnixb, and I would absolutely love to see what you guys have painted. If you would like further videos on anything I've discussed in the future, please let me know and I will be sure to get on that. And make sure to go check out my other videos on this channel, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content. Thank you!